The one interview so bad, Carson considered quitting that night. For 30 years, Johnny Carson defined late-night television with his unflappable poise and masterful control. Through over 4,500 episodes and 22,000 guests, Carson maintained a calm, professional demeanor that became his trademark. No matter what happened, awkward moments, failed jokes, difficult celebrities, Carson never lost his composure on air, except once. On a seemingly ordinary night in 1975, one of America's most celebrated literary figures appeared on The Tonight Show in a condition so shocking that it didn't just derail an interview, it nearly ended Carson's legendary career. "I've never seen Johnny that upset, before or after," revealed a former NBC executive who witnessed the aftermath of what many consider the most disastrous interview in the show's history. He wasn't just angry about a bad segment. He was questioning everything: his control over the show, the network's support, whether he even wanted to continue in television. It was the closest he ever came to walking away. Today, we're revealing the full, uncensored story of the interview, so catastrophic that Carson himself ordered all copies destroyed the night that literary icon Truman Capote's final Tonight Show appearance pushed television's most unshakable host to the breaking point. But first, we need to understand what made this particular interview different from the countless other difficult guests Carson had handled throughout his career, and why this single 30-minute segment represented everything Carson feared most about live television.
Right, and I think you said that you thought that most actors and actresses were dumb. Am I quoting out of context, or is that about basically what you said?
Well, yeah, what I said was that
Truman Capote's final intoxicated appearance, mid-1970s. By the summer of 1975, Truman Capote was one of America's most recognized authors. His masterwork, In Cold Blood, had revolutionized literary journalism, while earlier novels like Breakfast at Tiffany's had been adapted into Hollywood classics. His distinctive voice and eccentric persona had made him not just a literary figure, but a celebrity, a frequent guest on talk shows, where his wit and gossip about the rich and famous reliably entertained audiences. Capote had appeared on The Tonight Show multiple times before, usually delivering charming anecdotes about his famous friends and offering literary observations in his characteristic high-pitched drawl. Carson typically enjoyed their exchanges, finding Capote's combination of intellectual heft and celebrity dish perfect for late-night television. Johnny had genuine respect for Capote as a writer, explained a Tonight Show producer who worked on many of Capote's appearances. He saw Truman as representing a certain cultural elevation for the program, someone who brought literary credibility while still being entertaining. Their previous conversations had always gone well. The night of the fateful appearance, however, alarm bells began ringing the moment Capote arrived at the NBC studios. The author, who had been battling increasingly severe alcohol and substance abuse problems, appeared dramatically impaired, slurring his words, unsteady on his feet, and displaying erratic behavior that concerned the production team. He could barely walk to the green room, recalled a production assistant who was present that evening. His handler, I think it was his lawyer, was basically holding him upright. Our talent coordinator immediately went to the executive producer and said, "We can't put him on air like this." But no one wanted to be the person to tell Johnny they had to cancel a segment with Truman Capote at the last minute. Carson, who was famously isolated from guests before the show to maintain spontaneity, received only a vague warning that Capote seemed a bit tired. When the interview began, the host was visibly shocked by Capote's condition. Johnny's eyes went wide when Capote stumbled onto the set, remembered a cameraman who was working that night. You could actually see him calculating in real time. Do I end this immediately, or do I try to salvage it? Remember, this was live television for much of the country. There was no easy way out. What followed was 30 minutes of increasingly excruciating television. Capote, barely able to form complete sentences, rambled incoherently about various topics. When Carson attempted to guide the conversation toward Capote's work, the author would begin responses that dissolved into mumbled non sequiturs. Several times he appeared to forget where he was entirely. Carson was doing everything possible to create a coherent segment, noted a writer who witnessed the interview from backstage. He was finishing Truman's sentences, redirecting when he veered off into inappropriate territory, and desperately trying to find questions simple enough for Capote to answer. It was like watching a master juggler trying to keep broken plates in the air. The breaking point came when Capote began making explicit allegations about the private lives of several major celebrities, naming names and describing scenarios that were potentially libelous. Carson, recognizing the legal danger, attempted to change the subject, but Capote insisted on returning to the gossip. Johnny went to commercial, and that's when it happened, revealed a stage manager who was standing just off camera. Carson's smile vanished the instant the red light went off. He turned to his producer and said, "Get him out of here, now." It wasn't a suggestion, it was an order, and his tone was like nothing I'd ever heard from him before. During that commercial break, Carson left the stage, something he almost never did mid-interview. According to multiple witnesses, he went directly to his office and closed the door. When the program returned from break, announcer Ed McMahon explained that Capote wasn't feeling well and the show would move on to the next segment. Johnny was so furious after the segment, some crew members recalled him saying, "Why do I even do this show anymore?" A former writer remembered. It wasn't just performative anger. He felt humiliated. It wasn't just bad TV. It was a reminder of how little control he had when things went sideways. He told us, "If this is what it's going to be, maybe I'm done." While Carson's anger at the disastrous segment was evident, what few people realized at the time was how deeply the incident had shaken his confidence in the structure of The Tonight Show itself. In a rare moment of vulnerability, Carson expressed to his close associates that the Capote interview exposed fundamental flaws in how the program operated. Johnny told a few of us afterward that the incident made him question everything about how we screened guests, explained a longtime producer. He said, "If we can't prevent something like this, what's the point of all our preparation?" He was genuinely considering whether he wanted to continue with a show where such public embarrassment was always a possibility. Carson's dissatisfaction went beyond the specific incident to broader frustrations with NBC. In a heated meeting with network executives the following day, he reportedly demanded greater control over guest selection and pre-screening and raised the possibility of leaving the network if his concerns weren't addressed. "That meeting was tense," recalled an NBC executive who was present. "Johnny rarely made threats or ultimatums. He didn't need to. His position was so strong that even hinting he might walk away was enough to send everyone into panic mode. The network president practically guaranteed on the spot that nothing like the Capote incident would ever happen again." The aftermath of the interview had immediate and lasting consequences. NBC agreed to strengthen the pre-interview process and gave Carson's team greater authority to cancel guest appearances if similar situations arose in the future. Segments would no longer proceed solely to avoid last-minute scheduling problems. More significantly for Capote himself, the incident effectively ended his relationship with The Tonight Show. Though never officially banned in the way some problematic guests were, Capote was quietly removed from the list of potential invitees. Carson, who rarely held grudges over simple mistakes or bad performances, viewed Capote's appearance as something more serious, a breach of the basic professional respect that he expected from guests. Johnny distinguished between guests who were simply nervous or unprepared and those who showed disrespect for the show itself, explained a talent coordinator from that era. Coming on in that condition wasn't just unprofessional. Carson saw it as Capote essentially saying, "Your show isn't important enough for me to be sober." That's something Johnny couldn't forgive. Perhaps the most telling evidence of how deeply the incident affected Carson was his unprecedented request regarding the broadcast. In an era before widespread home recording, shows were preserved primarily through the network's own archives. According to multiple sources, Carson personally requested that the Capote segment be removed from all tape recordings and never used in any retrospectives or clip shows. Johnny wanted no record of that night to exist, confirmed a former NBC archivist. Most Tonight Show episodes were carefully preserved, but that segment was effectively erased from history. Johnny rarely used his power that way. He was usually happy to show bloopers or awkward moments, but the Capote interview touched something deeper. He didn't want it preserved because he felt it reflected poorly, not just on Capote, but on the show itself. For years afterward, Carson would occasionally reference the Capote incident in private conversations with staff as the benchmark for an unacceptable guest appearance. When particularly difficult celebrities were proposed for the show, he would sometimes ask simply, "Are we looking at another Capote situation?" The question alone was enough to make bookers reconsider. What makes the story particularly poignant is how it reflected the intersection of two brilliant careers at different points in their trajectories. Carson was at his peak, the undisputed king of late-night television, whose influence in American culture was at its height. Capote, by contrast, was entering the long, sad decline that would define his final years. After the publication of excerpts from his unfinished novel Answered Prayers alienated his society friends later that same year, Capote's downward spiral accelerated. In a way, that Tonight Show appearance was the beginning of the end for Capote in the mainstream, observed a literary critic who followed Capote's career. Before that, his substance issues were known but considered part of his eccentric persona. After Carson, the public narrative changed. He wasn't just colorful, he was troubled, unprofessional, potentially harmful to have on live television. For Carson, the crisis prompted a period of reflection that ultimately strengthened his approach to the show. After seriously considering leaving, he instead negotiated greater control over every aspect of The Tonight Show, from guest selection to broadcast schedule. The Capote incident, though nearly career-ending in the moment, paradoxically gave Carson leverage to create the conditions that would sustain his reign for another decade and a half. As a final irony, while Carson ordered all official copies of the interview destroyed, rumors persist that at least one recording survived in private hands. Former NBC employees occasionally reference having seen the footage, describing it as even more uncomfortable than contemporary accounts suggest. To this day, however, no verifiable copy has ever surfaced publicly, a testament to Carson's determination to erase the one night when television's most composed host nearly walked away from it all. The near-catastrophic Capote interview reveals a side of Johnny Carson rarely glimpsed by the public during his 3 decades as America's late-night companion. A fiercely protective professional whose calm exterior masked deep concerns about control, quality, and reputation. Behind the warm smile and relaxed demeanor was a perfectionist who understood that his success depended on maintaining certain standards, even when doing so required difficult decisions. What makes this story particularly significant is how it illuminates the unique pressures of Carson's position. Unlike most television hosts who could edit out problematic segments or simply apologize for occasional mishaps, Carson performed live for much of the country. This created a vulnerability that even his immense skill and experience couldn't completely mitigate. The Capote incident forced him to confront this fundamental anxiety about his chosen medium, the possibility that a single disastrous segment could undermine years of careful work. Carson's response to this crisis, nearly quitting before ultimately using it to secure greater control, exemplifies the strategic thinking that helped him maintain his position for so long. Rather than simply weathering the embarrassment, he translated a moment of professional vulnerability into leverage that strengthened his hand with the network. This ability to convert potential disaster into opportunity was characteristic of the business acumen that often went unnoticed beneath Carson's affable on-air persona. Perhaps most revealing is Carson's determination to erase all record of the interview, an unusual step for a man who generally took the occasional on-air mishap in stride. This exceptional response suggests that the Capote incident touched something deeper than professional pride. It threatened Carson's carefully constructed relationship with his audience. The implicit promise that while The Tonight Show might occasionally surprise you, it would never make you genuinely uncomfortable in your own living room. Ultimately, the story of that disastrous night in 1975 adds an essential dimension to our understanding of Johnny Carson. Behind the relaxed, unflappable host was a man deeply aware of how quickly it could all unravel, and determined never to let that happen again, even if it meant contemplating walking away from the most coveted position in television. The fact that most viewers never knew how close they came to losing Carson prematurely is perhaps the most telling testament to his professionalism. The crisis remained private, the footage was destroyed, and the following night, Carson was back behind his desk, seemingly without a care in the world, the consummate professional whose greatest skill may have been making the extraordinarily difficult job of hosting The Tonight Show look effortless.